Well, hello, McLean Church, and thank you for joining us today as we continue to live in the light of Easter, continue to live in the light of the resurrection in a series entitled How, where we're looking at how we practically implement, apply, appropriate, embrace the realities that are ours because Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Last week we talked about how we see. And remember, we said that God is in the continuous business of producing new life. God is continually bringing about resurrection moments in our experience. Often, however, we're not tuned in enough to what God is doing to see the new life that God is bringing. And our challenge from last week was to develop our spiritual eyesight so that when God shows up in a burning bush like he did for Moses in the ancient story out of the book of Exodus, we have the spiritual eyes to perceive and the spiritual ears to hear what God is saying and what God is doing. Remember last week we emphasized the point that God is active all around us and God is active in and through our lives. But if we can't see what God is doing, we can't participate with it or in it. And so last week again was all about developing our spiritual eyesight. If you didn't have a chance to hear that talk, please do so in one of the many ways it's available to you. This week, we wanted to talk about how we follow. Specifically, how do we follow Jesus Christ? Now, obviously, central to the Christian faith is this idea that we follow Jesus. We follow his teachings, we follow the example of his life. To be a Christian is to be a Christ follower, to be a Jesus follower. But what exactly does that look like, and how exactly do we do that? Now, for 2,000 years, the Christian movement has talked about that question. The Christian movement has answered that question and provided us many different directives and examples of how we follow Jesus. So I don't want to suggest in a short 20 or so minute talk that we can sum up everything that has been said in the course of 2 millennia about what it means to follow Jesus. But I hope what we can do today is provide a very simple structure or a very simple paradigm or model that helps us really succinctly understand what it's all about to be a Christian, what it means at the core to be a follower of Jesus, and by extension, what it means to be a church, what it means to be a group of followers of Jesus. And I want to try to answer this question with a very simple image or diagram suggesting that following Jesus involves fixing our focus on two particular points or two particular areas or realities. Following Jesus is about focusing on our heart, and it's about focusing on our neighbor. And just to show you my artistic talent, how do you like that? Following Jesus involves focusing on my heart and focusing on my neighbor. And think about these ideas like this. Jesus talked a lot about our heart. For Jesus, in the ancient Near East, coming out of a Semitic background, the heart represented the center of one's being. It was the core of who a person was. It was the essence of a person's being or experience. The heart was the center. We still use the word heart to talk about the core of who we are as people. And Jesus challenged people to think about the core of their being as being ultimately spiritual. That yes, there is certainly a material reality, and as people we exist in a material space with material bodies, but there's something about us that is different than, transcendent from our material experience. And again, different traditions and different times have called this different things: heart, soul, spirit, consciousness, cosmic essence. Call it what you will. All of us know there is something. There's something at our center, there's something at our core that is more than just a set of biological processes or material realities. Jesus talked about the importance of paying attention to that core or that center of our being, because it was the core, our heart, where our deepest connection with God was found. Where the reality of our being and the reality of God's being uniquely merged or combined. And Jesus was talking all the time about the importance of the heart, the importance of the condition of the heart, the importance of paying attention to that spiritual dynamic in us from which the totality of our being flows. And to follow Jesus means first and foremost that I'm paying attention to that reality inside of me that uniquely connects with and is unified with the divine. To become increasingly aware of that connection and live more increasingly into that connection, some would say, is the goal of the Christian life. And I would say it is indeed one of the goals. It's not the only goal, but it's one. To live aware of, in a sense of developing that inner sense or inner part of my being that connects with the divine, maturing, paying attention to that reality. How do I take care of my heart? Well, as we said last week, we do it through spiritual practices and spiritual traditions. Taking care of our heart, well, it's like developing any other part of our being. If I want to learn a foreign language, say I decided I wanted to learn Spanish. If I don't have a system by which to learn that language, I'll never make much progress learning it. Sure, I can pick up a word here or there. I can maybe gain some familiarity with that language. But we know with every aspect of life that we want to significantly develop or change, we need a system to help us develop or grow that area of our lives. Spiritual practices and spiritual traditions, as we talked about last week, they provide that system that helps me grow my heart, that helps me become more aware of that spiritual reality inside of me. And last week we talked about a couple examples of these practices and traditions that are so helpful in terms of spiritual practices. Weekly engagement in a worship experience like you're doing right now as part of McLean Church Online. Such a central experience or practice that helps what? Form a weekly system in my life that makes me attuned to, aware of the reality of my heart. Time each day in prayer and Bible reading, be it as simplistic or as limited as it may be, 5 minutes in the morning, has an amazing effect on tuning us into and connecting us with that spiritual core of our being. And it is from our heart, that we find our greatest connection with God. Jesus said, when asked what the greatest commandment was, he said, love the Lord your God. How? With all your heart. Connect the deepest part of your reality with the reality of a loving God. Spiritual practices and spiritual traditions. For instance, we talked about observing the different seasons of the church year as a helpful spiritual tradition. They make me more aware of this spiritual reality that is my heart. And following Jesus, it starts with me paying attention to my heart and growing my awareness of my heart's connection to the divine. For many people, the heart is where it begins and where it ends in terms of what it means to follow Jesus. But Jesus taught and modeled something much more. Jesus taught that we should not only pay attention to and work to develop our heart, but Jesus called us to pay attention to and serve our neighbor. Jesus understood that if it's only about the heart, following Jesus becomes very self-absorbed and self-focused. Jesus was clear that life had to have both an inner focus and an outer focus. We had to give appropriate time to tending to ourselves, but we also had to serve the needs of others if our life was to be complete, if our life was to be fulfilled. And so Jesus talked and taught about the importance of paying attention not just to our heart, but to our neighbor. And of course, when Jesus was asked who our neighbor is, he responded with the story of the Good Samaritan, which among the many things the story taught, it helped us to see that our neighbor was really anyone whose path we crossed that could use our help or our assistance. We often talk as a church about being the good. Jesus called us to pay attention to our hearts and then to go into our worlds, our neighborhoods, our communities, our homes, and be agents that brought good into those experiences and those realities. Our heart gives us a passion for what we do in the world. focus on our neighbor gives us a purpose. And as human beings, we need both to live a meaningful and fulfilling life. We need a passion. We need some reason bigger than ourselves to live. And Jesus taught us that as we increasingly recognize our connection with God, that connection with God, that awareness of our integration into a spiritual reality, that produces a passion that now manifests itself in the purpose of doing good for our neighbor. Oftentimes we talk about this in terms of serving. I like to think of it just in terms of doing good. Every day we have an opportunity to go into our world where we are going to meet and encounter our neighbor. It could be the kid we sit next to on the seat on the school bus, the person that we meet when we walk into the break room at work, could be the cashier at the grocery store. We encounter a world full of people, and Jesus, in essence, in the story of the Good Samaritan, said they're all our neighbors. In every one of those encounters, we have a choice to make. Will I be an agent that brings good into this encounter? Or will I be neutral or negative? A heart connected to the reality of God is always driving us to bring good into our encounters with our neighbors. Now, sometimes this takes on a really defined expression. Sometimes we volunteer to be involved in certain endeavors or certain ministries. We commit to do certain practices regularly that are intentional and defined means of serving our neighbor, and that's all really good. But there's also this opportunity every day just in the encounters we have, the casual encounters, to be agents of good, to live out our purpose that flows from our passion, which is clearly why Jesus, when asked what the greatest commandment was, said, well, it's to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. But then Jesus said, but there's a second one that's just like it, and that is to love your neighbor as yourself. Why? Because Christianity involves paying attention to my heart and my neighbor. Following Jesus involves me focusing on my heart, but also focusing on my neighbor. You ready for this? If you put these two together, it's like a pair of glasses. And you know, when you look at an eye chart and they cover one eye, you can see pretty well, but when they let you look at the chart with both eyes through both lenses, then you see most clearly. That's what Jesus was calling his followers to do. Pay attention to your heart and pay attention to your neighbor. Every day recognize that you are connected to a spiritual reality, that you are connected to God, that you have a deep connection to the divine. But that connection means nothing unless you're aware of it or tuned into it. So employ the spiritual practices and the spiritual traditions in your life to make you aware of that core essence of who you are, but don't stop there. Recognize that you also have a responsibility, but in reality, an opportunity to focus on your neighbor, to be a person who brings good into the world, both through intentional service opportunities, but maybe even more importantly, through the casual encounters that you will have with people every day, at school, at work, when you're out shopping, every day, an opportunity to bring good into someone else's reality when the heart and the neighbor are held side by side, when they're both kept in focus. Now we have a clear vision for what it means to follow Jesus. And of course, the neat thing about all this is, really, this is what the church represents or does. Because on the one hand, the church helps us engage in spiritual practices and traditions. And on the other hand, it helps us focus on and serve our community or our neighbor. Why? Because Jesus taught us to pay attention to our heart, and He taught us to pay attention to others. And to follow Jesus is to be a part of a community that is doing this corporately or together. And while maybe you could do it on your own, there's so much more power when you're joined together with others who are trying to pay attention to their hearts, trying to pay attention to the people around them, looking at reality through both lenses. That's what it means to follow Jesus. Now, a couple really practical things to close our talk out today. Focusing on our neighbor, serving our neighbor. Sometimes we can do that through the church. There is probably more opportunity outside of the church. In fact, there absolutely is more opportunity outside of the church to serve and do good to our neighbors. So don't think about this purely in terms of what can I do through the church. Think about this in terms of the opportunities that are in front of me every day to do good and make a positive difference. But that said, we're in a season where we have a unique opportunity for some. If this is something that might appeal to you as we come into summer, serving the children and family of our church, families of our church, is so very important to us. And during the summer months, we need extra help in our children's ministry area, particularly at our physical locations of Edinburgh and Union City. If you're a person who's at least 18 years old, and you've been a part of our church for at least 6 months, and you have or can obtain your clearances necessary to serve in our McLean Kids area, we'd be very much interested in talking to you about how you could help us in the months ahead. You can go on our website or our app to the Serve section and fill out a form indicating your interest in serving in this area for us. Again, this is one area that if you're looking for a place to do good to your neighbor, maybe this is a good place for you to find that meaningful spot of service. There are opportunities all around us to do good, sometimes formally, sometimes informally. The issue is intentionality, so let me challenge you to be intentional intentional about doing good to your neighbor. But secondly, when it comes to the heart, and especially thinking about spiritual practices that might help us engage our hearts, oftentimes going into summer, we think about this as a time of sort of stopping some activities that we do throughout the school year. We talk about sort of unwinding, letting down, maybe reducing some of the structure in our lives. Let me challenge you that maybe the summer is a really good time to start being intentional about some of these spiritual practices. Maybe other activities that stop for the summer, like having to get the kids out the door for school early in the morning, or maybe other activities that we're involved in September through May that cease for June, July, and August. Maybe that space creates room to pay attention to some spiritual practices. Maybe this summer is a great opportunity to start your day with a simple time of prayer, or to start reading your Bible each day, or maybe to start a habit or practice of journaling. Don't look at the summer as just a time to stop certain activities. Maybe the months ahead of us are a unique opportunity to start. Why do we do all this? Why do we engage in spiritual practices and traditions? Why do we serve our neighbor? Why do we serve our community? Because that's what it means to follow Jesus. And we believe, and it has been our experience, that the most fulfilling life a person can have, the life of the most joy, the life of the most purpose, the life of the most peace, is found in following Him. So let's be intentional about doing that as we enter the summer months. And let's watch our hearts grow. And let's watch our communities change as we follow Jesus' lead.